Chapter 3374. No matter who it is, there will always be some kind of wishful thinking, hoping that they can get the greatest benefits without any effort. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind, reaping the benefits of the fisherman. This is what everyone is most willing to do on a daily basis. Until the last step, no one is willing to be the first bird, but when it really comes to the last step, everyone can only take the risk. Therefore, although no one wants to make a move on them now, this doesn't mean that this problem is solved just like that. If all of this was really so easy to solve, then Master, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to help them solve this problem. Ing, you have to be mentally prepared. Next is a group battle. When Zyron chuckled, this kind of group battle, he really didn't participate in it. He didn't expect that he would become the target of everyone's siege as soon as he arrived at Penglai Palace. At the same time, he was also a little excited. Through this competition, he can also test what level his strength has reached. Shangguan Ying nodded her head lightly, her eyes filled with determination and interest. Let's fight. I've never been afraid of fighting since I was young. Hearing Shangguan Ying's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two chuckled in their hearts. They really believe these words. Every time Shangguan Ying makes a move, they can feel the violence in her bones. Thinking about it, not letting her make a move is what makes her feel the most uncomfortable. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were getting closer and closer to building number 5, some cultivators finally couldn't hold it in anymore. For the demon pet egg, everyone, let go together. A disciple took the lead and shouted. With his strength alone, it was naturally impossible to win. At this point, they could only gang up. No matter what the process is, as long as they can snatch this demon pet egg, it's fine. As the disciple's voice fell, the atmosphere suddenly changed. All the disciples looked at each other, and the desire in their eyes couldn't be more obvious. Do it! Everyone also knew that if they didn't make a move now, they wouldn't have a chance. Immediately, there were cultivators rushing towards Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. After someone took the lead, the rest of the cultivators began to move as well. Regardless of whose hands this demon pet egg ended up in, they had to at least get this demon pet egg out of the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. In just a short moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were surrounded by the crowd. Di Beichun, as long as you hand over the demon pet egg, we can let you live. A disciple took the lead and said, his gaze locked onto them. The strength displayed by Di Beichun's group of 4 was not weak. If they could directly obtain the demon pet egg, then they would be able to reduce some of the trouble. That's right. With just the strength of the 4 of you, it's impossible for you to be a match for us. Newcomers should keep a low profile here. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourself for showing off too much. The demon pet egg is not something that newcomers like you can touch. As long as you hand over the demon pet egg, you can still safely stay in the outer palace. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three found it funny when they heard the words showing off too much. Chapter 3375. If I were to hand over the demon pet egg, there wouldn't be enough for so many of you, right? The corner of Di Beichun's mouth curled up into a sneer. He looked at the disciple in front of him who was threatening him to hand over the demon pet egg and mocked. Hearing this, the disciple was also stunned for a moment. He said, you don't need to care about this matter. You just need to hand over the demon pet egg first. The other disciples only surrounded Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. They didn't make any moves. In fact, they had already made a decision in their hearts. Regardless of whether Di Beichun and the other two obediently handed over the demon pet egg or not, they had to deal with these 4 fellows. After all, they were cultivators that Master Long had recruited. If Master Long were to make a fuss about it, no matter who obtained the demon pet egg, it would inevitably cause quite a bit of trouble. Only by cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. Even if Master Long was furious, he wouldn't severely punish them for the 4 dead people. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had long seen through the other party's trick. In fact, they didn't play this kind of trick on a daily basis. If someone were to naively hand over the item, then that would be truly stupid. You guys don't have to fantasize anymore. The demon pet egg has already been contracted by us. You guys can't get anything. Shangguan Ying coldly said. These guys in front of her didn't seem to be ordinary annoying. She might as well break everyone's fantasies like this. Following Shangguan Ying's words, the cultivators present couldn't help but be stunned. Thick astonishment flashed across their faces. However, they were quickly refuted by the other cultivators. This is impossible. You don't need to tell such a clumsy lie to deceive us. What's impossible about that? Shangguan Ying raised her eyebrows. We are very clear about what you guys are planning. How could you possibly bring the demon pet egg out? The cultivators present looked at each other. For a moment, no one was able to determine whether what Shangguan Ying said was true or false. Why you care so much? As long as the four of them die. Wouldn't we be clear? Are you sure you don't want to hand over the demon pet egg? You're the unlucky ones. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. The murderous intent in their eyes gradually thickened. They no longer had the mood to continue wasting time like this. Those who want our things are almost all dead. D. Baichen's lips curled into a cold smile as he responded to the other party's threat with a counter-threat. As soon as he said that, the expressions of all the cultivators present changed. Rage immediately surged onto their faces. Don't be courteous with them, just attack. In a split second, vigorous elemental energy exploded in the outer hall. All the cultivators began to surround and attack Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. If it were any other cultivator, they would have panicked when facing so many cultivators. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three weren't that afraid, because during this period of time in the oceanic world, they had been facing such a situation. No matter how many cultivators were besieging them, they only needed to face the few cultivators in front of them. As for how long they could hold on, that would depend on their strength. Chapter 3376. With so many cultivators channeling their elemental energy at the same time, the commotion was extremely shocking. Xiaohe and Xiaobai had already appeared beside Bailey Hongzhuang. With their bodies shrunk, it was difficult for them to be noticed by other cultivators. In a group battle like this, it was undoubtedly very effective. Bai Shi did not appear together with them because they were already surrounded. The number of cultivators that the four of them faced was the same as the number of cultivators that each of them faced after Bai Shi appeared. It was impossible for them to kill so many cultivators at once. Hence, they had to hold on for a long enough time. This kind of tag team battle was very taxing on the cultivators. Even if they had some confidence in their endurance, they knew that they could not hold on forever. Even if Bai Shi appeared a little later, he could still help them withstand a certain amount of pressure and buy them some time to catch their breath. Master, are we going to take their lives or what? Xiaohe could not help but ask. Once it joined forces with Xiaobai to launch a sneak attack, the effect would be very obvious. Hence, they had to be clear about the limits of their attack. Just take care of them, Bailey Hongzhuang said without hesitation. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a ruthless light. These outer palace disciples in front of them clearly intended to take their lives. Since that was the case, there was no need for them to show any mercy. Furthermore, they were currently being ganged up on. If they took their opponents' lives, it meant that they would have to continue this tag team battle. This was extremely disadvantageous to them. If they wanted to resolve this situation, they could only take their opponents' lives directly. They believed that when more and more cultivators died, these people would be more cautious. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xiaohe and Xiaobai also nodded. If they had to be careful when they attacked, it would be troublesome for them to move. Since they did not have to worry about anything now, they could go all out. The battle erupted in an instant. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's elemental energy surged to the extreme. Before they could make a move, the others' attacks had already struck towards them. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three reacted extremely quickly and quickly began to face the enemy. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of fists colliding continuously spread out as yuan power ripples continuously spread out. Both parties were extremely ruthless in their attacks, unwilling to give the other party even the slightest chance to breathe. In the course of this battle, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's movements were nimble and quick. Even though there were many people attacking them, they were still able to deal with them without panicking. Speaking of which, This was all thanks to their experience in the oceanic world. Thinking back to when they were besieged by monster beasts in the oceanic world, they were also flustered. However, as they gradually gained more experience, they became more proficient in dealing with group attacks. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's orderly attacks, the cultivators who were attacking in groups were clearly a little messy. They were not partners in the first place. At this moment, they were only working together for the same goal. All of their attacks were launched at the same time. Some of them landed on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's bodies, while some landed on the other cultivators. Chapter 3377. This scene was obviously something that no one had expected. It was just that when they were attacking, they were accidentally affected by other cultivators. Naturally, it was inevitable that they would be a little angry. Then, those with bad tempers directly began to retaliate. Unknowingly, some cultivators had already begun to fight among themselves. Regarding this point, everyone felt speechless for a while. However, the goal of the vast majority of cultivators was still Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. The monster pet egg was what they wanted wholeheartedly. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of elemental energy colliding constantly resounded. Cracks had already appeared on the flat ground in the midst of everyone's battle. Fortunately, the road in Penglai Palace was wide enough. Otherwise, the buildings on the side would have been affected by their battle and turned into ruins. Elemental energy constantly poured out from Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Now, they could be said to be conserving every bit of elemental energy. Only by preserving a little bit of elemental energy could they hold on for a while longer. Bailey Hongzhuang had already prepared the elixir supply. In the face of such a battle of attrition, elemental energy consumption was the fastest, so replenishing elemental energy was the most important. As soon as they attacked, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three tried their best to finish off the other party. Otherwise, they would have to spend more energy and elemental energy. Fortunately, the cultivation of the vast majority of cultivators was only at Purple Realm Level 5 and Purple Realm Level 6. Everyone was also a cultivator who had not been in Penglai Palace for a long time. In addition, it was not so easy to break through at this level. Even with the cultivation resources of Penglai Palace, the spirit stones in everyone's hands were still not enough for cultivation. Therefore, this speed was relatively stagnant. Under such circumstances, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's efficiency was not bad. The cultivators in front of them fell one by one in front of them, completely disappearing from this world. However, compared to their speed of elimination, Xiao He and Xiao Bai were the fastest. Their sneak attacks often caught the cultivators off guard. Moreover, they directly attacked the opponent's weakest point as soon as they attacked, not giving the opponent the slightest chance to fight back. Many cultivators directly fell into their path like this. Even until death, they did not understand how they died. The other cultivators gradually realized that some cultivators had lost their lives after letting out a scream. They did not notice what had happened at all. No, something else is ambushing us. One of the cultivators had a grave expression on his face, revealing some panic and fear. Apart from Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, there was clearly no one else present. However, many of them had clearly been ambushed. Hearing this cultivator's words, the other cultivators' expressions changed as they nodded. That's right. There's indeed something invisible attacking us. Everyone, be careful. What kind of sorcery did they use? For a moment, the way everyone looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three changed completely. If they could see it, they could still defend against it. However, this feeling of being invisible and untouchable made everyone panic and their hair stand on end. Seeing that everyone had mistaken Xiao He and Xiao Bai's sneak attacks as sorcery, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three found it funny. These guys were really too stupid to think of such a reason. Chapter 3378. It had to be said that Xiao He and Xiao Bai's ability to change their figures at will was a great weapon for a sneak attack. Especially in this chaotic battle, everyone was focused on fighting, and the surrounding environment was even more noisy. No one would notice that two things the size of stones could actually threaten their lives. From another perspective, if it was Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three who encountered such a sneak attack, they would probably feel that it was very scary. Hearing Shangguan Ying Ying's words, everyone was even more uncertain. They clearly knew that Shangguan Ying Ying's words were mocking them, but the situation in front of them really made them think this way. After this incident, everyone came back to their senses and regained some rationality and calmness. With this look, everyone realized that unknowingly, there were already so many corpses beside Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. It really made them completely stunned. The other party was only 4 new cultivators. With so many of them besieging them, not only did they not gain any benefits, but they also made so many people pay with their lives. In comparison, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's strength was really terrifying. For a moment, many cultivators' expressions changed. Previously, they only thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had used some special method to hook up with Master Long, causing Master Long to be obsessed and be willing to give them 3 demon pet eggs. They had never thought that there would be any other reason, but after such a battle, they suddenly realized that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's strength was indeed extraordinary. Just this potential alone was much stronger than most of them present. At least, if it were them, they would not be able to hold on for so long in such a group fight, nor would they be able to have such a terrifying battle record. At this moment, everyone finally understood that perhaps Master Long wasn't blinded by greed and decided to give the 3 demon beast eggs to them. Instead, he truly took a fancy to their cultivation talent and did so. This news had been spread earlier, but no one believed that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 could catch Master Long's eye, so it was naturally ignored by everyone. Now that they had personally witnessed the fighting power of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3, they felt that this news might be true. If it was an ordinary 5th level Purple Realm cultivator, it would be impossible to burst out such a strong fighting power. Moreover, after fighting for such a long time, if it was an ordinary cultivator, their physical strength would have been exhausted long ago. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was a human, and it seemed that it was not a big deal. With this comparison, they could see the difference between Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3's ordinary cultivators. Thinking of this, everyone could not help but feel regret. If Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were really such geniuses, then their future development would be limitless. Once they became Inner Palace disciples, they would truly have a meteoric rise. Since they had done such a thing, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others would definitely not let them off. Everyone's expressions changed again and again as various considerations flashed through their minds. In the end, their gazes became firm and ruthless. We must kill them. Otherwise, our days will not be good. No one knew who shouted first, but the rest of the cultivators all agreed one after another. Chapter 3379. On this point, everyone had already reached a consensus. If they couldn't deal with Bailey Hongzhuang and the others today, then they would face a lot of trouble in the future. Since Master Long was willing to give them 3 demon pet eggs, this proved how much Master Long valued them. Once they complained to Master Long, then they would have to bear the consequences. Immediately, everyone's attacks towards Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 became more and more ruthless. This was not only related to the problem of seizing the demon beast eggs, but also related to their future safety and development. Looking at everyone's storm-like attacks, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were also barely able to resist. The pressure was getting bigger and bigger. Previously, when everyone was focused on dealing with them, they were also thinking about how to fish in troubled waters to save more energy and seize the demon pet eggs. But now, they were completely on the same side, so they were already sparing no effort to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3. Under such circumstances, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 could be said to be under a lot of pressure. Their individual fighting strength was indeed not bad, but facing so many cultivators, the consumption of their bodies was not small, and their attention was even more focused. If they were not careful, they would be ambushed by the other party. Once they were injured, then the situation would only get worse and worse. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun unleashed their blood aura field at almost the same time. The amount of elemental energy consumed by unleashing the blood aura field was not small. Previously, in order to save more elemental energy, the two of them had not unleashed the blood aura field. At this moment, the pressure was getting bigger and bigger, and they could no longer hold on, so they could only unleash the blood aura field. As Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun unleashed their blood aura field, their auras also instantly rose. After Deep Beichun and Bailey Hongzhuang's auras rose, the original pressure immediately weakened by a lot. Shangguan Ying and Wen Xiren also quietly heaved a sigh of relief and had a chance to breathe. Everyone's expression changed when they saw the blood aura released by Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun. They had long known that two of the people in Bailey Hongzhuang's team were the inheritors of the blood aura field, but they had never been able to determine who they were. Now they finally knew. Not only that, after witnessing the sudden increase in strength of Bailey Hongzhuang, they finally understood how powerful the inheritance of the blood aura was. Previously, they had only heard rumors, so they didn't feel anything. However, now that they had seen it with their own eyes, they finally understood the effect of the blood aura field on one's strength. Immediately, they became extremely jealous. It was no wonder that the inheritance of the blood aura field was so difficult to obtain. Who would have thought that its effects would be so shocking? If they could obtain this inheritance, their strength would increase by leaps and bounds. It would not be a problem for them to fight above their level. As soon as the blood aura field was unleashed, Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun's attacks once again increased by a notch. Even though everyone's attacks were extremely fierce, the two's counterattacks were not inferior in the slightest. They were all extremely powerful. In comparison, Xiren and Shangguan Ying were under more pressure. However, Xiaohe and Xiaobai were also helping them share the pressure. Both sides erupted with all their strength, and the fluctuations of the battle were extremely shocking. Under such a tag-team battle, Bailey Hongzhuang's team was inevitably injured. Chapter 3380. Flowers of blood blossomed on the bodies of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Their physical strength was gradually weakening, and a sense of exhaustion was slowly creeping up on them. Even though they had the ability to fight above their level, their opponents were not ordinary people. Furthermore, almost all of them were full of energy. This made them feel like they were unable to continue. Taking turns to fight was a battle of attrition. The longer it took, the more difficult it would be to persevere. After Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun had unleashed the blood aura, the pressure on them had been greatly reduced. However, the rate at which their primary energy was being depleted was extremely terrifying. Even though they had continuously used pills to replenish their primary energy, the rate at which their primary energy was being replenished could not keep up with the rate at which their primary energy was being depleted. Bang! Shangguan Ying was directly knocked to the ground by her opponent. Her beautiful face was pale, and her speed of standing up was much slower as she gradually lost her strength. Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw that Shangguan Ying had created an opening. Immediately, they launched an even fiercer attack towards Shangguan Ying. Ying, seeing that Shangguan Ying was in danger, Xiren's eyes flashed with anxiety. He immediately stood in front of Shangguan Ying to block the attacks for her. Ding, ding, ding. The sound of swords clashing rang out continuously. Xiren's eyes had long turned red. These people in front of him actually wanted to take his Ying's life. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Shangguan Ying quickly stood up. However, Xiren had taken on too many attacks alone. He had been stabbed in the waist. Seeing that Xiren and Shangguan Ying were in danger, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart skipped a beat. She quickly released Baishir. Roar! Baishir let out a deafening roar as soon as he appeared. It immediately shocked the surrounding cultivators. Seeing the sudden appearance of this ferocious beast, the crowd could not help but be stunned. However, they were not too surprised. From the information that they had gathered earlier, they already knew that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had contracted beasts. Moreover, these contracted beasts were not weak. When Baishir saw this scene, the light in his eyes sharpened. Bailey Hongzhuang said directly, "Go and help Ying and the others." Although her and Di Beichen's situation was not optimistic, they could at least hold on for a while. Xiren and Shangwan Ying were in danger. If the White Lion did not help, their lives could be in danger at any time. With the addition of the White Lion, the pressure on Xiren and Shangwan Ying was greatly alleviated. However, they felt an unbearable pain all over their bodies. Needless to say, their wounds hurt. Even their muscles felt an indescribable soreness. It was as if every time they swung their swords, they needed to exert a great deal of strength. Their hands gradually became numb, and their attacks gradually slowed down. The situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others uncontrollably became worse. In such a battle of attrition, even a body made of iron would not be able to withstand it. The smell of blood continued to spread throughout the area. Flowers of blood bloomed on the ground, enchanting and poignant. When the cultivators in the outer palace saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had managed to withstand their attacks for so long, the fear in their hearts grew. This level of battle power was simply too terrifying. If it were any of them, they would not have the confidence to do so. However, the 4 newcomers had managed to hold on for so long. After exclaiming in surprise, the crowd felt a lingering fear. Chapter 33:81. They can't take it anymore. Take this opportunity to kill them. That's right. As long as we kill them, this demon pet egg will be ours. There were more and more wounds on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Her white robe was now dyed red with blood. Her delicate and perfect face was pale, without the slightest trace of blood, but her bright phoenix eyes were always shining with a firm and persistent light. Every face in front of her was clearly imprinted in her heart. As long as they didn't die today, she would return all of this pain to these guys in front of her. Di Beichen's handsome face was already stained with a few drops of blood. The blood on his clothes was already indistinguishable from his own or someone else's. All of it gathered together, and his killing intent was also getting stronger and stronger. Shangwan Ying and Wen Xiren's situation was even worse than Bailey Hongzhuang's. Ever since they were injured, their movements had become sluggish, causing the frequency of their injuries to increase. Xiren's face had already become abnormally pale due to excessive blood loss. His hand that was holding the sword trembled slightly. Every bit of strength in his body had been squeezed out. At this moment, he was completely relying on his willpower to continue fighting. Even he himself didn't know when he would completely lose his strength and faint. However, he knew that he couldn't fall like this. Once he fell like this, he would never wake up again. The light in Shangwan Ying's eyes became more and more ruthless, revealing an unspeakable resentment. These damn guys in front of them had forced them to such a state just for some benefits. They were simply abominable. Even though they had already expected such a tragic scene, when all of this really happened, the resentment and anger in their hearts continued to surge. They couldn't wait to kill all of these guys in front of them. Fortunately, the world was peaceful. The manager of the outer palace really came back. We've already persevered for so long, but we haven't seen any trace of them. Shangwan Ying's face was pale, and her voice was filled with despair. They clearly knew that this was an unwinnable battle. Their only hope was to wait for the manager to appear. However, it had already been so long, and the other party still hadn't made any movements. Perhaps the other party didn't plan to come out at all. Xiren's face was also a little ugly. According to his judgment, the matter had already escalated to such a point that the other party should have appeared. Logically speaking, with such a huge commotion, they shouldn't be able to sit by and do nothing. He couldn't figure it out. There were already many corpses on the ground. He felt that no force would sit by and do nothing in such a situation. However, the other party hadn't shown up for so long, which made him unable to figure it out. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen also had a trace of doubt in their eyes. They felt that their previous judgment could not be wrong, but after so long, the manager still had not appeared, and they could not help but feel a little nervous. Could it be that Penglai Palace's management of the cultivators was so lax that no matter what kind of commotion was caused in the outer hall, it could not attract them to come out? If that was the case, then there was a problem with their judgment. Chapter 3382. D. Bachan's eyes darkened slightly. Logically speaking, this shouldn't happen. Could it be that we haven't caused enough of a ruckus? Hearing D. Bachan's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but look at each other. If this situation was not considered big enough, then what would be considered big enough? If this continues, we won't be able to hold on any longer. Xiren's expression was extremely ugly. He had already used all of his skills, and the strength in his body had been gradually depleted. If this continued, he could fall into a coma at any time. These vile people who only cared about benefits had long regarded them as prey. Once they fell, the only outcome would be death. That's right. If this continues, all of us will die here. Shangguan Yingying glanced around. Although they had killed a lot of cultivators, compared to this huge number, what they had done was still not enough. This was because the number of disciples in the outer palace of Penglai Palace was too great. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes also showed a touch of worry. She did not understand where their judgment had gone wrong, but it was obvious that they had to think of other ways at the moment. If the manager was unwilling to appear, they could not just throw their lives away here. When the other cultivators saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, as well as Bai Shi, were gradually losing their strength, their eyes lit up with excitement. They can't hold on any longer. Take this opportunity to kill them directly. Everyone, work harder. These four guys are not far from death. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three looked at the covetous eyes of the people around them. They were like evil spirits, wishing that they could die as soon as possible so that they could divide their wealth. I will never let these guys take advantage of me. Shangguan Yingying's eyes flashed with a ruthless light. A crazy idea gradually emerged in her mind. She was already unable to continue fighting. At this moment, every attack she made was relying on her own will to fight. She did not know how long she could last. The only thing she knew was that even if she died, she would not let these people in front of her gain the slightest advantage. Even if I'm really going to die, I'd rather self-destruct than leave these guys with any benefits. The light in Shangguan Yingying's eyes became crazier and more ruthless. After fighting to this point, she no longer expected to survive. She only had one thought now. Even if she was going to die, she had to drag a few people down with her. These guys wanted to kill her so that they could benefit from it, but she was going to drag them down to hell with her. The gazes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others changed when they heard Shangguan Yingying's words. They never expected Shangguan Yingying to be so unyielding as to even think of such a plan. Yingying, don't be rash. Just because it's not the last moment doesn't mean that we don't have a chance to turn things around. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly spoke up. Even though the situation before them was very difficult to resolve, this did not mean that they had to die. She had to first dispel Shangguan Yingying's thoughts. Chapter 3383. You're already on the path to death, and you still want to live on. What a fool's dream. In my opinion, you might as well stop struggling and just stop. We'll give you a quick death and save you the pain. That's right. Since you can't hold on any longer, why continue to make things difficult for yourself? Death is also a form of relief for you. The outer palace disciples who were besieging them smiled. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were now cornered beasts. They believed that in less than a quarter of an hour, the four of them would die by their hands. There was indeed a manager in the outer palace. However, the conflicts in the outer palace were not small. Ordinary movements would not alarm them at all. Although today's movements were much larger than usual, they were already prepared. Therefore, they immediately used their primary energy to prop up a barrier and suppress the movements. This way, the manager would not be in a hurry to come out and take a look. They also had enough time to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others did not notice this detail. Therefore, they were still waiting for help. Listening to the other party's merciless ridicule, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart surged with madness. She still wanted to stay in Penglai Palace, so she was not willing to go to the extreme. If there was really no room for negotiation, then she could only give it her all. Thinking of this, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but look at Di Beichen. Di Beichen noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze and immediately understood what she meant. He immediately nodded. Now, this was the only way. Since the other party wanted them dead, the only thing they could do was to let the other party die first. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze deepened. Since the manager of Penglai Island was unwilling to come out, she would solve this problem herself. If you don't offend me, I won't offend you. Since you're forcing me step by step, don't blame me for being ruthless. Bailey Hongzhuang's sharp eyes exuded a shocking murderous aura. Her gaze swept across everyone in front of her. She rarely used such means, but now that she was forced to this point, she had no other choice. These people in front of her all deserved to die. When Xiren and Shangwan Yingying could not help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. They did not know that Bailey Hongzhuang still had a backup plan. Di Beichen's expression was very indifferent. He had already discussed this with Bailey Hongzhuang. This was their trump card, and if they could avoid it, it would be best not to use it. Because once they used it, they could not be sure what kind of attitude Penglai Palace would have towards them. Perhaps they would no longer be a member of Penglai Palace from then on. Perhaps there would be an even worse outcome. As of now, the number of Outer Hall disciples who had died in their hands was not small. If the number increased, the manager of Penglai Palace would not be able to bear it. However, now that they had been forced to a dead end, there was no other way. After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the other cultivators couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. There was a burst of surprise in their hearts. They didn't believe that Bailey Hongzhuang's group had a way to escape at this time. Chapter 3384. What a joke. I don't believe that they still have a way to get out of this predicament. They must be deliberately scaring us. Aren't you talking nonsense? They're already at the end of their rope. If they want to blame someone, they can only blame their luck for being too good. Their own strength isn't strong enough, yet they still possess such a demon pet egg. An ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. As for Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4, everyone didn't have any special feelings. They also didn't want to kill them because of this. It's just that the demon pet egg they possessed was too tempting. If they wanted to snatch the demon pet egg back, the only way was to take the lives of Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4. So what if we let them brag for a while? After they die, they won't have the slightest chance. Everyone mocked one after another, but their eyes were constantly flashing with a bit of light. Once Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 died, it was also a problem for them to distribute the demon pet egg with so many people present. This battle wouldn't end with the death of Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 3. Since you all like to die so much, then all of you can go and die. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes turned sharp, and a surge of killing intent surged out. Relying on strength, they could only fight until here, but relying on poison techniques, they could completely get rid of the predicament in front of them. In the next moment, Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang moved almost at the same time. Immediately after, in everyone's line of sight, they only saw a beautiful cherry blossom between them. A faint fragrance entered their nostrils, causing them to be unable to help but take a deep breath. Such a refreshing fragrance was truly hard to come by. Everyone only felt that after smelling this fragrance, their entire spirit was shaken. The original bit of exhaustion seemed to have disappeared in an instant, and their entire bodies seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, entering an extremely good state. The romantic cherry blossoms quietly danced, landing on the enchanting blooming blood flowers. Within the beauty, there was a bit of strangeness. The rich fragrance spread throughout the entire outer hall, and everyone was intoxicated as they smelled this wisp of fragrance. Originally, there were still many cultivators who were extremely wary of this fragrance, but after seeing that everyone was fine after smelling this fragrance, and on the contrary, their entire spirit, energy, and spirit were raised, they relaxed a little. Everyone looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang in confusion. They didn't understand what they were doing. They were already at the end of their rope, and now they helped everyone raise their condition to the extreme. Wasn't this speeding up their own death? However, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and Bai Shi had already quietly returned by Bailey Hongzhuang, Xiao Bai, Bai, and White. Based on their understanding of their master, the stronger the fragrance, the more intoxicating it was, the more poisonous it was. If they enter the chaos ring first, they would be able to avoid being affected. However, they were still filled with curiosity towards the final effect. Xiren and Bailey Hongzhuang had only quietly watched Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang's actions from the beginning to the end. They were completely unaware of Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang's plans, but they had already built up complete trust between them. Chapter 3385. Even if the other cultivators did not believe it, they believed it unwaveringly. The rich fragrance gradually spread. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's faces were dignified. They had already held their breath, not willing to smell the fragrance even a little bit. In this world, the more beautiful something was, the more poisonous it was. The richer the fragrance, the more unusual it was. The crowd was still attacking Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were also passively defending against the enemy. However, the injuries on their bodies were increasing. Their fresh blood mixed with the rich fragrance actually had a sweet taste. Shangguan Yingying and Wen Xiren's spirits were greatly improved after smelling the fragrance. They felt that their arms, which were originally unable to move, had regained their strength. Immediately, their speed in attacking the enemy increased. No one noticed that the faces of the cultivators in front of them were gradually turning red. Their eyes were filled with intense excitement. "Wife, how long will it take for the drug to take effect?" Di Beichun asked softly. Their situation was getting worse. If this continued, they would no longer have the strength to fight back in less than 10 minutes. It started to take effect now. As they continue to use their primary energy, the speed at which the poison takes effect will increase. Through their primary energy, it will completely enter their bodies. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were cold and ruthless. It won't take long for it to take effect completely. She had always believed that every injustice had its perpetrator and every debt its debtor. Even if she had the ability to attack a group of people, she was unwilling to use it most of the time. That was because she did not want to affect the other innocent cultivators. However, there were hundreds of cultivators in front of her. Every single one of them wanted to take their lives. Therefore, she could only use this method. It was a cruel and bloody method. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were bitterly holding on under the siege of the crowd. Not only were the cultivators' faces gradually turning red, even their eyes were gradually turning red. However, they were too excited to notice it. They only felt that their strength had increased tremendously. They had never been in such a good state before. This feeling made them feel like they were willing to compete with anyone. It was as if they had already become the strongest in the world, and no one could be compared to them. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curved into a cold smile. It was starting to take effect. The next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other and quickly retreated a few steps. At the same time, the cultivators surrounding Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three paused as well. Doubt flashed through their eyes at the same time, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to do. However, a look of understanding flashed in their eyes, and they began to attack the cultivators beside them in a frenzy. Every one of them seemed to treat the cultivators around them as their irreconcilable enemies. They didn't care about the condition of their own bodies and only wanted to kill the other party. In this state of excitement, no one seemed to feel the pain on their bodies. The pain seemed to have completely disappeared, leaving only the carefree feeling of battle. Chapter 3386. However, the two immediately noticed that when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying were also in the same situation. With a move, the two immediately appeared beside Shangguan Yingying and Wen Xiren. In the next second, the two did not hesitate to directly knock out Xiren and Shangguan Yingying. If this continued, Shangguan Yingying and Xiren would also begin to harm themselves. "Wife, are Xiren and Yingying okay?" Di Beichun was worried. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head slightly and said, As long as they take the antidote now, they will be fine. Don't worry. Originally, she wanted to directly remind Xiren and Shangguan Yingying to hold their breath, but at that time, whether it was Shangguan Yingying or Xiren, they were unable to continue. Although this fragrance was poisonous, it could stimulate the best state of the cultivator in a short time. In that case, it was difficult to rely on the strength of when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying, so this was the only way. If not, I am afraid that when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's lives would be in danger now. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichun was also relieved. Today's situation was really beyond their expectations. They did not expect that from the beginning to the end, the manager of Penglai Palace did not intend to come forward. After Bailey Hongzhuang quickly gave Shangguan Yingying and Shangguan Yingying the antidote, the two of them slowly woke up. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun, when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying were both stunned, then their eyes widened, and they quickly said, "What's the situation now? Are we out of trouble?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head, indicating when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying to see the situation around them clearly. "Not really out of trouble, but we have a chance to breathe for a while." After Xiren and Shangguan Yingying saw the chaotic scene in front of them, they realized that today's matter was not over. However, after seeing the performance of the other cultivators, the two of them could not help but be stunned. For a moment, they could not recover from their shock. "What's the situation now?" Shangguan Yingying's eyes widened. "Why are they fighting each other?" After pondering for a moment, when Xiren's eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun. "This is the method you two used, right?" Di Beichun nodded. "Yes, this is the poison concocted by Hongzhuang. You were poisoned before, but you are fine now. I knew you guys still had a trump card. But what exactly is going on? Is there something wrong with these guys' brains?" Shangguan Yingying's face was full of curiosity. Even though there was a burst of pain in her body, she did not care about it now. She just wanted to know what was going on. "You have to ask Hongzhuang," Di Beichun said. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged, then said, "Didn't we encounter a situation of being besieged when we were on Monkey Island? The poison I used back then was similar to the poison I'm using now. However, the poison I used this time is of a higher grade and more powerful. Speaking of which, this was the poison she made after being inspired by the last time. Usually, even if they had a conflict with cultivators, it was only a few people. This kind of poison was not needed at all." Chapter 3387. Bailey Hongzhuang had always been extremely talented in the art of medicine and poison. As long as she wanted to concoct a poison, she would be able to concoct it easily. When she was in the Magic Tower, she found that the materials in the Magic Tower were very abundant. When she saw some materials that she was interested in, Bailey Hongzhuang did not hesitate to exchange for them. Although the area of Penglai Island was not as big as the outside world, the heaven and earth treasures here were much more than the outside world. A lot of herbs that were not usually seen could be seen here. Bailey Hongzhuang had always been very interested in herbs, so she collected a lot of them. When they were heading to Penglai Island, because there were too many uncertain factors, she deliberately concocted a lot of poisons to prevent them from being in danger because they were not strong enough. However, the things that happened in the end clearly proved that she had foresight. If she did not prepare these herbs, their situation would definitely be very bad. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Shangguan Yingying and the others also understood. Although half a year had passed, they still remembered clearly what had happened on the Monkey Island. So these cultivators started killing each other like the gold essence piebald monkeys on the Monkey Island. Can they recover? They can't recover on their own. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. Unless there's an antidote, but I did not concoct a lot of antidotes. The reason why she concocted the poison was to kill them. How could she concoct an antidote to help them escape? The reason why she concocted a few antidotes was to prevent accidents from happening, such as her own people being poisoned. These people are so despicable. They should be killed and sent to hell. Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with hatred. This kind of group attack really made her angry to the extreme. If Bailey Hongzhuang still had such a method, then their lives would really be lost. Xiren nodded. These people, they all deserve to die. In the vision of the four people, These outer palace disciples had already killed until their eyes turned red. Everyone in front of them had become their enemy. This dazzling and tyrannical martial skill continued to erupt. Flowers of blood continued to bloom. The blood on the ground was getting more and more. However, no one had the slightest intention of stopping. The thick smell of blood gradually enveloped the entire outer palace. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others took the opportunity to consume the pills. The injuries on their bodies were much more serious than the other cultivators. Their white clothes had already been dyed red with blood. There were countless big and small wounds on them. It could be said that they were riddled with holes. Just to recover from these injuries, it would take a long time. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and the others saw that the poison had dissipated and ran out. Seeing the state of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, the 6 contracted beasts felt their hearts ache. Bailey Hongzhuang stroked Baishir's fur. In the previous battle, Baishir had helped them block a lot of attacks. Now, Baishir's body was covered in blood, and the wounds were even more shocking. Looking at the wounds on Baishir's body, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but feel her heart ache. Suddenly, her hatred for these cultivators grew. Chapter 3388. Feeling his master's heartache for him, Baishir could not help but say, "Master, you don't have to worry. I'm fine." In the previous battle, the white lion had expended a lot of energy. However, as a demonic beast, its endurance and combat strength were not bad. It was also a little glad that it had not slacked off these days. Otherwise, the situation just now would have been really terrible. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart ached slightly. Seeing Baishir injured, this feeling was even worse than her being injured. She stroked Baishir's soft fur and said, "It's been hard on you today. Being able to fight side by side with Master has always been the happiest thing for Baishir." Baishir's eyes shone brightly. He had always hoped to be able to fight side by side with Master. To be able to help Master was the happiest thing for him. As for being injured, he did not care at all. Master's injuries were obviously not lighter than his. Bailey Hongzhuang rubbed her face against Baishir. A smile slowly appeared on her lips, and a trace of warmth emerged in her heart. "Master, since these guys want our things so much, we can't let them take advantage of us." Xiao He came in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 in Baishir, Xiao He and Xiao Bai, who were responsible for the sneak attack, did not suffer any serious injuries. They were just exhausted. Since coming to Penglai Island, they had encountered one trouble after another. However, it was really the first time that they had encountered such a miserable situation. Almost everyone had no strength left. If another opponent appeared now, they would not have any strength to fight back at all. Fortunately, no one else would appear for the time being. Hearing Xiao He's words, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but ask, "What do you want to do? There's so many guys here. Collect their Qianquan bags. This is a huge sum of money." Xiao He's eyes shone brightly. They had spent so much effort and almost lost their lives here. No matter what, they had to collect some interest. Bailey Hongzhuang finally understood. Their current situation was really too bad, so she didn't think of this at all. Now that she was reminded by Xiao He, she immediately nodded. "That's right. Go ahead and collect your spoils." Xiao He and Xiao Bai still had strength, but the 4 of them had long lost all their strength. At this moment, they sat on the ground and did not even want to move. Yes, in the next second, Xiao He and Xiao Bai brought the 3 newborn beasties to collect their spoils of war. Although the 3 little fellows did not understand what had happened, they felt a pang of heartache when they saw that their master was injured. Now that Xiao He and Xiao Bai were leading the way, they naturally wanted to do whatever they could to help. Under such circumstances, the 5 little fellows quickly scuttled into the chaotic crowd, emptying one Qianquan bag after another. Although the wealth of the outer palace disciples could not be considered rich, with so many people gathered together, it was still an extremely rich resource. As the outer palace disciples began to kill each other, they naturally did not care about hiding the ripples from the battle. Immediately, the ripples quickly spread. Chapter 3389. However, after Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 left, they did not feel the slightest fluctuation of elemental energy for a long time. This could not help but make the two of them feel a little strange. Could it be the situation outside was not as bad as they had expected? Logically speaking, once this news spread out, it would definitely attract the jealousy of many cultivators. They were very clear about the personalities of the disciples in the outer palace. Moreover, the outer palace had never prohibited fights between cultivators, so this point was magnified. Snatching things from others had become a common thing. The only difference was that even if someone wanted to snatch something, it would only be a few people. There were very few things that could attract everyone's attention like a demon pet egg. It seems that our judgment is wrong. Izihua's eyes flashed with surprise. Could it be that these four little fellows have some special method that actually made everyone give up on their plans? Hearing this, Long Yanwei's expression was somewhat complicated. Logically speaking, this problem shouldn't be so easy to solve. However, until now, there's been no movement. Perhaps we have really underestimated them. According to his judgment, he believed that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three would use this opportunity to cause quite a commotion. As a result, they would naturally make a move as well. However, this would have nothing to do with Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. However, there was no movement at all after so long. This proved that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's actions were different from his judgment. Thinking back to their confident looks, Long Yanwei was really curious about how they would solve this problem. Although these four little fellows haven't been in the Penglai Island for long, all of them are very smart. Izihua smiled slightly. I think that maybe you made the right bet this time. However, after Long Yanwei and Izihua had relaxed for a period of time, suddenly, a terrifying wave of elemental energy came from the direction of the outer palace. Feeling the fluctuation of the elemental energy, Long Yanwei and Izihua's expressions couldn't help but change. This was because the fluctuation of the elemental energy was too shocking. Why would there be such a huge fluctuation of elemental energy? A tinge of nervousness surfaced on Izihua's face. Logically speaking, even if the two sides had clashed, it was impossible for the aura to be so terrifying. Based on the enormous fluctuation of origin energy, they were able to determine that there were at least 100 people launching attacks at the same time. This was a little too terrifying. Long Yanwei's expression changed as a thought quickly flashed through his mind. Perhaps we were too careless. Hearing this, Izihua was slightly startled and quickly understood what Long Yanwei meant. You mean that they blocked this origin energy fluctuation? Other than this, I can't think of any other reason. Long Yanwei's face was gloomy to the extreme. He gave the demon pet eggs to Di Beichen and the others because he valued them greatly. He wanted to use this method to increase the strength of Di Beichen and the others, but he didn't want Di Beichen and the others to lose their lives just like that. If his actions caused Di Beichen and the others to lose their lives, then the one who would feel guilty would be him. They've been gone for a long time. That means Chapter 3390. Almost at the first moment he guessed the situation, Izihua had already made a judgment in his heart. They ignored the fact that the outer palace disciples were all old foxes and never thought that they would use this move to shield the fluctuations of origin energy. Therefore, they did not go out to take a look. Now that so much time had passed and the origin energy fluctuations that erupted were so shocking, presumably Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had already fallen. It was just that the other cultivators were fighting over the Qinquan bags of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Thinking of this, Izihua's heart sank. Not only because Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had lost their lives for no reason, but also because Long Yanwei's 3 demon pet eggs had been wasted just like that. One had to know that back then, they had spent a lot of effort to obtain these 3 demon pet eggs. They had always been Long Yanwei's treasure collection, but now they had just been contracted and had actually fallen along with their master. Let's go out and take a look. Long Yanwei had obviously thought of this situation. This was undoubtedly what he did not want to see the most, but he still had a trace of hope in his heart. As long as he did not see the corpses of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 with his own eyes, then everything was still possible. When Long Yanwei and Izihua flew towards the direction of the outer palace, the closer they got to the outer palace, the stronger the smell of blood they discovered. Immediately, their expressions became even more unsightly. Such a strong smell of blood. I'm afraid that many disciples have died. Izihua frowned. If there were only a few people, the smell of blood would definitely not be so strong. And to be so strong to such an extent, there would at least be dozens or even hundreds of people. Although there would often be fights in the outer palace of the Panlai Palace, there would only be a dozen people at most. However, such a strong smell of blood, this was the first time it had happened. Long Yanwei's heart sank even more. I'm afraid that they were besieged by all the outer palace disciples. At this moment, Long Yanwei's heart also produced a strong sense of regret. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 left, he should have followed them out to take a look. He had been too negligent. As Long Yanwei and Izihua got closer and closer to the outer palace, the thick smell of blood almost reached a choking level. The 2 of them were extremely fast and directly climbed to the roof. Only then did they clearly see the situation in front of them. However, when they saw the situation in front of them clearly, both of them couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others rested for a moment and recovered a bit of strength before slowly standing up. Even though they had already taken the medicinal pills, their condition was not much better. Their bodies were still sore, and they could only recover after they returned to their rooms. As for these fellows who were killing each other in front of them, they had no intention of paying any attention to them. Since blood had already flowed like a river, he might as well be more thorough and let these fellows all fall here. They would never show mercy to anyone who offended them. So what if they had the advantage in numbers? When they had the idea of killing Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, they should have been prepared to do so. They carried out their revenge thoroughly. When Long Yanwei and Izihua arrived, this was the scene they saw. There were many corpses lying on the ground, and the ground had long been dyed red with blood. The thick smell of blood was coming from here. Chapter 3391. Even though they had already expected that the situation would be very tragic, the scene in front of them still exceeded their expectations. This was a bit shocking. Such a thing happening in the outer palace of the Panlai Palace was something that had never happened before. Yanwei, these 3 demon pet eggs of yours have really caused a bloody battle. Izihua couldn't help but sigh. The 3 demon pet eggs did indeed have an incomparable attraction. However, it was still a bit too shocking to cause such a large number of casualties. Thinking about it, no matter if it was him or Long Yanwei, they never thought that it would cause such a huge commotion. If the palace master knew about this, it would probably be very troublesome. However, all the cultivators who were recruited by Panlai Palace had a certain level of ability. Usually, small-scale battles were harmless. However, from the scene in front of them, it was clear that a small half of the disciples from the outer palace were involved. Even they couldn't ignore this loss. Long Yanwei's expression was extremely ugly. He also didn't think that the commotion would be so terrifying. Just for 3 demon pet eggs, so many cultivators had actually fallen. Although these guys had always valued benefits, they weren't so stupid as to directly throw their lives away here. Let's go ahead and take a look. Long Yanwei's voice was slightly heavy. In front of them, they could only see the corpses on the ground. However, the battle fluctuations were still a little further ahead. Izihua nodded and immediately followed Long Yanwei to the front. When his shoes stepped on the ground, the soles of his feet were immediately stained with blood. The entire ground was now dyed red with blood. That sticky feeling couldn't help but make people feel uncomfortable. Not long after, Long Yanwei and Izihua saw the situation of everyone's battle. Even they couldn't help but be speechless at such a tragic situation. It was simply too shocking. Long Yanwei glanced at the crowd and quickly found Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 who were preparing to leave. His eyes immediately revealed a dense surprise. Not only Long Yanwei, Izihua also noticed this and couldn't help but be surprised. According to their judgment, it was impossible for Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three to survive under such a siege. However, although Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were severely injured, they were still alive. This was far beyond their expectations. Long Yanwei quietly heaved a sigh of relief. He had always thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had already fallen and felt extremely guilty in his heart. He did not expect them to be so powerful that they could still persist in such a situation. However, when they thought of this, Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua could not help but look at each other. The fact that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were able to survive despite being besieged like this meant that their combat strength was simply too heaven-defying. If this demonic pet egg wasn't contracted, they could still understand if they took out the demonic pet egg to avoid a calamity. However, the demonic pet egg had already been contracted. There was absolutely no possibility of taking out the demonic pet egg. Under such circumstances, the fact that the four of them were still able to survive was simply too shocking. For a moment, even they couldn't understand how Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were able to do this. In the next second, Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua arrived beside Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. "How are you guys?" Chapter 3392. They thought that it was impossible for the manager of Penglai Palace to come out. They did not expect that after they had settled everything, Long Yanwei and Long Jinjing would actually come. "We're fine," Deep Beichen slowly said. At this moment, their feelings were somewhat complicated. They originally thought that with such a huge battle fluctuation, it should have attracted them over no matter what. However, when they were at the end of the line and there was no movement at all, they could not help but feel a little disappointed. How did things turn out like this? Yi Zihua frowned. The situation in front of him was really terrible. However, it's good that you're fine. Otherwise, Yanwei would probably blame himself to death. Hearing Yi Zihua's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three could not help but look at each other. There was some doubt in their hearts. Without waiting for them to ask the reason, Yi Zihua had already started to speak. "These fellows from the outer palace are getting more and more cunning. They actually learned how to hide the fluctuation of yuan power. This matter must be dealt with properly. Otherwise, if they use this method in the future, we won't even know how much trouble they will cause." Dense anger surged onto Yi Zihua's face. Such a big matter was actually concealed like this. If they had not hidden the fluctuation of yuan power, this matter would not have developed to such an irreversible stage. As soon as these words were spoken, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three finally understood. Dense astonishment surfaced in their eyes. "I was wondering why no one had come. So this is the problem." When Xiren came to a sudden understanding, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't figure out why no one had come over when the commotion had already reached such an extent. It turned out that these outer hall disciples had already discussed a countermeasure for the sake of taking their lives. "These guys are too shrewd. We didn't even notice this before." Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. It seemed that their judgment was not wrong at all. It was just that they had overlooked this point. "All of you stop," Long Yanwei sternly shouted. Dense anger burned in his eyes. These fellows were really lawless. If he did not properly teach these fellows a lesson, they would simply be out of his control in the future. However, after Long Yanwei's voice sounded, the group of outer palace disciples did not seem to have heard half of it. Their hands did not stop moving at all as they continued to attack the other party with all their might. Seeing this scene, Long Yanwei became increasingly angry. However, just as he was about to speak again, he suddenly discovered that there was something wrong with the state of the cultivators before him. "Zihua, what happened to them?" Long Yanwei frowned. After careful observation, he realized that these cultivators had flushed faces. Their eyes flickered with excitement, as if they were completely immersed in their own mental state. Yi Zihua also found the scene in front of him very strange. They seem to be controlled and can't hear us. How could this be? For a moment, Long Yanwei could not help but be startled. How could so many cultivators suddenly fall into such a situation? In the next second, Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua's gazes landed on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. "Do you know what's going on?" Although it was a question, the two of them spoke with an affirmative tone. Chapter 3393. Hearing Long Yanwei's question, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three couldn't help but look at each other. Their feelings were extremely complicated. If Long Yanwei and Yizihua hadn't appeared too late, they wouldn't have used this trick. However, now that things had come to this point, whether to admit it or not was a problem. They are poisoned. After thinking for a moment, Bailey Hongzhuang said in a deep voice. Both Long Yanwei and Yizihua were very smart people. Even if they denied it, the other party wouldn't believe it. In that case, they might as well admit it directly. Poison. Hearing the word poisoned again, Yizihua and Long Yanwei were a little stunned. Last time, when Bailey Hongzhuang and the others dealt with Gao Hanshan, the method they used to win was also poison. However, at that time, they didn't take it too seriously. They only thought that it was normal for cultivators to have some life-saving methods. However, this time, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other solution to their predicament was still poison. This was a little surprising. Could it be that the poison last time wasn't a trump card that they deliberately kept, but that they were very good at using poison? Bailey Hongzhuang nodded lightly. That's right. Then what will happen to them in the end? Long Yanwei asked in a deep voice. Death. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was cold. When she said these two words, there was no expression or emotion. These guys in front of her all deserve to die. They will all die. Yizihua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. There were nearly 100 cultivators in front of them, and all of them were above the 5th level of the purple realm. All of them would die. That's right, Di Beichun said indifferently. When they made this decision, they had already expected such a scene to happen. Therefore, even when Yizihua asked, he was very calm. Looking at the indifferent appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Yizihua and Long Yanwei couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. They didn't expect these little guys to be so extreme. It was completely beyond their expectations. If you do this, you will be punished in the Penglai Palace. Long Yanwei frowned slightly. The situation in front of him was not what he wanted to see. Hearing this, Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with dissatisfaction. If we didn't do this, we would be the ones who died now. They were merely defending themselves. If it weren't for the fact that these fellows in front of them had gone too far and forced them into a corner, they wouldn't have resorted to such means. After careful consideration, Long Yanwei roughly understood the situation from before. If Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had used such a method from the beginning, then they would not have been injured at all. Right now, not only were they injured, but their injuries were also extremely serious. He could sense their dispirited auras. Clearly, they were already extremely weak. Presumably, they had fought head-on when they were besieged at the beginning. It was only when they were at the end of their rope that they were forced to use this move. This method was exactly the same as what he had guessed before. It was just that they hadn't thought that the origin energy waves would be blocked, causing these mistakes to occur. I know that this matter cannot be blamed on you. However, the damage done is not small. Why don't you hand over the antidote? We will deal with this matter, Long Yanwei said slowly. Chapter 3394. Sorry, I don't have the antidote. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Long Yanwei and Yizihua were both stunned. Their faces flashed with a thick look of astonishment. No, antidote. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and explained. No one can make so many antidotes. Now she already knew that Long Yanwei and Yizihua had not come because their yuan power fluctuations were blocked. The dissatisfaction and grudge in her heart had disappeared, but she really did not have the antidote. Long Yanwei suddenly understood. Looking at the number of cultivators who had fallen into a trance, no one could make so many antidotes. Then what can we do now? Knock them out, Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Hearing this, although Long Yanwei and Yizihua were very helpless, they could only do so. After completing all this, Bailey Hongzhuang told Long Yanwei and Yizihua the method of making the antidote. The four of them had already taken the lead to return to their residence. In the end, they could not get away with this matter because of Long Yanwei. Bailey Hongzhuang did not have the slightest sympathy for those cultivators and did not intend to let them go. However, she could not drag Long Yanwei down, so she chose to hand over the method of making the antidote. However, they originally had a lot of opponents. Now, after this battle, most of them have been dealt with. There are not many people left. It would not be too late to deal with them in the future. She believed that when those guys woke up, they would not dare to provoke them again unless they wanted to die. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three who had returned to the house suddenly seemed to have lost all their strength. They did not have the slightest bit of strength to move. Long Yanwei sent a doctor to help them treat their injuries. The doctor could not help but be dumbfounded when he saw the shocking wounds on their bodies. "How are they?" Long Yanwei asked aloud. After such a big thing happened today, his mood was also very bad. The palace master and the others had been out recently. There were not many people in Penglai Palace. He did not expect such a big mess to happen now. Their injuries are very serious. If they were an ordinary cultivator, I'm afraid that they would not have survived. However, their mental strength is very tenacious and their body's endurance is very strong. That's why they were able to hold on. The doctor's words were filled with deep sighs. Their bodies were riddled with injuries, and there was almost no place that was intact. Hearing this, Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua looked at each other. They were a little surprised. Their body's endurance was strong. This meant that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had suffered many injuries on a daily basis. That was why their body's endurance was so strong. It seemed that these four little fellows had spent a lot of effort in their cultivation. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to reach such a level. Can they keep their lives? The doctor nodded. Although the current situation is very bad, their perseverance is very tenacious. As long as they are nursed well, they will be fine. That's good. Long Yanwei was relieved. Now, we have to pay attention to the other cultivators. Compared to the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, it seemed that the situation of the other cultivators was more troublesome. Chapter 3395. Regarding this point, they had already heard the exact news from the other physicians. They had originally wanted to ask Bailey Hongzhuang about it, but Bailey Hongzhuang's injuries were very serious and she needed to rest properly. Therefore, they could only suppress their doubts for the time being and wait for Bailey Hongzhuang to recover before asking her. After this incident, they also understood that Bailey Hongzhuang's method of using poison was extremely terrifying. This was because all the physicians were extremely shocked when they found out about the power of the poison. This effect was simply too shocking. After reaching the purple realm cultivation, ordinary poisons would not have any effect on cultivators at all. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's poison technique was able to cause so many cultivators to fall victim to it at the same time. This showed just how powerful it was. According to the physicians, Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely an incomparably powerful poison master. This point had clearly exceeded Long Yanwei and Yi Zihua's expectations. With Bailey Hongzhuang's age, she was already an extremely rare genius to be able to reach the 5th level of the Purple Realm. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was also an extremely powerful medicine master. How could this not cause them to be astonished? From the perspective of poison techniques, Bailey Hongzhuang was simply a master who was on equal footing with them. It seemed that they had underestimated this four-man team. Just their combat strength alone was extremely terrifying when they burst out. In addition to Bailey Hongzhuang's identity as a poison master, even a large team would not be able to do anything to them. It was no wonder that they dared to provoke Gao Hanshun at such a young age and even destroyed the entire Heaven-Shaking Association. Their abilities were also very impressive. Yanwei, from the looks of it, Di Beichen's four-man team's combat strength is much stronger than you think. The corner of Yi Zihua's lips curled into a faint smile. I now feel that your judgment is very correct. If this four-man team continues to develop, it's very likely that they will become famous in the future. Long Yanwei smiled faintly. However, the seriousness in his eyes did not disappear. Currently, compared to this, I'm more worried about what kind of performance the Hall Chief will have after he returns. The Hall Master had only left with his men for a few days. Who would have thought that such a big thing would happen? When the Hall Master returned, his expression would definitely be very interesting. Hearing Long Yanwei's words, Yi Zihua thought for a moment, and the smile on his lips became a little awkward. This question, I can only give you an answer after the Hall Master returns. For the strength of the Outer Palace disciples to drop at such a time is not a good thing for us. Long Yanwei frowned. The decrease in the strength of the Outer Palace disciples meant that the strength of the entire Penglai Palace had also decreased. Now that things have come to this, what's the use of thinking about this? Izihua patted Long Yanwei's shoulder. You don't have to worry too much. This is only a small part of it. Most of the disciples are training outside. Although their strength has decreased, it's not to the point where it's too serious. The number of Outer Palace disciples was very large. There were nearly 2,000 of them. There were more than 200 cultivators who besieged Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Now that nearly 200 had died, there were dozens of people whose strength had decreased. Although this number seemed to be a lot compared to the number of Outer Palace disciples, it was not that exaggerated. Chapter 33:96. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were severely injured, they had sustained minor injuries on a daily basis. Under such circumstances, their body's recovery abilities were extremely strong. Therefore, under the treatment of the doctor, the injuries of the four people were constantly improving. As a physician, Bailey Hongzhuang understood her own condition very well. However, Long Yanwei and Izihua clearly had no intention of harming them. Hence, she felt at ease and allowed the physician to treat them. Even though the battle this time had been extremely difficult, as long as they had endured through it, they would have reaped many benefits. At the very least, from now on, no one would dare to lay their hands on their contracted beasts. If one were to say that they had been easily bullied in the past after this incident, anyone who dared to cause trouble for them would have to weigh their own abilities, because they had used their actions to prove their abilities. Even though they were newcomers, they were definitely not people who could be bullied by ordinary people. 7 days later, the paleness on Bailey Hongzhuang's face has gradually dissipated and some rosy color has returned to her face. Master, how are your injuries? Xiao He and Xiao Bai stared worriedly at Bailey Hongzhuang. Even though their master had often been injured in the past, such serious injuries were rare. Seeing the worried looks on their faces, Bailey Hongzhuang stroked their little heads. An elegant and heartwarming smile appeared on her devastatingly beautiful face. Don't worry, my injuries are getting better every day. It's no longer a big problem now. I just need to recuperate for a while. Her broken bones had been reconnected and some of her external wounds were slowly healing. However, her internal injuries were clearly not something that could be completely healed in a short period of time. At the very least, she could only recuperate in peace for a short period of time. She could not think about going out into the world again. That's good. Xiao He and Xiao Bai patted their chests. Previously, their master had been in a comatose state, and they could not help but worry. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze then landed on Baisher. Baisher's injuries were also very serious, but the doctor had already treated him. At this moment, the white lion was in a deep sleep. When it was healing, it would often fall into a deep sleep. When it woke up, it meant that its injuries had been healed. Master, when Master Long and Master Yi were talking, we vaguely heard some news. It seems like the strength of those poisoned fellows is starting to decline. Xiao Bai's eyes flashed with curiosity. It was really curious about this. Those fellows had pushed its master to such a state and almost lost their lives. However, Master Long had appeared and saved those fellows. It was already very dissatisfied in its heart. Now that it heard this news, it could not help but be excited. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. It should have such an effect. So it's true. Xiao He and Xiao Bai's eyes lit up. Master, how did you do it? This poison has already stimulated all of their potential. It's like a pill that can save a life at a critical moment. The aftereffects are very terrifying. Chapter 33:97. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Xiao He and Xiao Bai could not help but be shocked. They had only vaguely heard Master Long say that these people's cultivation had decreased, but they did not expect it to decrease by so much. It should be known that once one reached the Purple Realm, it would take a lot of effort and time just to increase one's cultivation by one level. Some people who were not outstanding enough would have to spend several years. Although their master's poison did not kill them, It directly caused their cultivation to decrease by so much. If those cultivators knew this fact, they would not be able to bear it. Although this feeling was not as good as death, it was not much better. In this way, those guys will probably be angry to death. Xiaobai laughed out loud. Serves them right for coveting our things. I'm looking forward to those guys' expressions the next time they see us. I think they will want to kill us, right? Xiaohei raised her eyebrows. However, I like the look in their eyes. The dark and deep phoenix eyes were filled with a cold and sinister light. Bailey Hongzhuang had already sentenced these guys to death in her heart. The reason why she chose to tell Master Long the method of making the antidote was firstly, because she did not want to implicate Master Long, who had helped them a lot. Secondly, because of this, she had already collected some interest. For cultivators, there is nothing more unbearable than the decrease of their cultivation. If those guys dared to cause trouble for them in the future, then she would naturally not be polite. Do you know how Beichin and the others are doing? Bailey Hongzhuang asked aloud. Under Master Long's arrangement, each of them had returned to their own rooms, so she did not know how they were recovering. In 7 days, according to her judgment, they should be much better than before. The medical skills of the doctors in Penglai Palace were also very good. At least she could not find any problems when treating her. I heard that their situation has improved a lot. Now, Master Long and Master E are waiting for you to wake up so that they can ask about the decline of those cultivators' strength. Xiaohei said slowly, Master, you've caused those cultivators' cultivation levels to drop collectively. Will this affect you? Such a big movement had already caused a sensation in the entire Penglai Palace. Bailey Hongzhuang had been recuperating in her room these days, so she did not know what had happened outside. However, Xiaohei and Xiaobai knew that almost everyone was talking about this matter now. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang pondered for a moment, then waved her hand and said, Don't worry, there won't be any big problems. In the previous situation, they had no choice. Even if there was a punishment, what was done was done. There was no point in worrying about it now. Not only that, according to her judgment, Master Long would definitely think of a way to protect them. Since everyone is waiting for me to go out so that I can give them an explanation, then I might as well rest in my room for a few more days. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged her shoulders. She could imagine that those fellows whose cultivation had declined must be as anxious as ants on a hot pan, hoping that she would appear to give them some hope. Chapter 3398. Xiaohei and Xiaobai chuckled when they heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words. Their master was becoming more and more two-faced. Under Bailey Hongzhuang's instructions, Xiaohei and Xiaobai shrunk their figures and went directly to Di Beichin and the other two's room to take a look. After knowing that Di Beichin and the other two's conditions were gradually improving, Bailey Hongzhuang was completely relieved. They obviously did not plan to go out immediately. Their injuries had not fully recovered yet, and there were many cultivators who hated them. It was better to wait until their injuries were fully recovered before going out. This way, they would be much safer. In this way, Xiaohei and Xiaobai became the mouthpiece between the four of them. It was very convenient. In addition to the doctor's treatment, Bailey Hongzhuang was also recuperating from her injuries. Under this kind of quiet recuperation, her recovery speed could be said to be extremely fast. After another 7 days, Bailey Hongzhuang's injuries had completely recovered. Ever since she had broken through to the Purple Realm, her body's recovery ability had become much stronger than before. If she had suffered such serious injuries in the past, she would not have been able to recover in less than a month. Now, the time had been reduced by half. When Long Yanwei and Yizihua saw that Bailey Hongzhuang did not show any signs of leaving the room, the two of them had a certain judgment in their hearts. However, they did not choose to expose it. In the end, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were also victims of this matter. From the beginning to the end, the ones who had harmed them were other cultivators. The conflict was not started by the four of them at all. However, the result was somewhat unexpected. The group of disciples who had originally thought that they would win, without a doubt, were now either dead or injured. The cultivators who had survived all experienced a drop in their cultivation bases. On the contrary, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were not too affected. Although the injury was very serious, it was gradually recovering. Moreover, it did not leave any sequelae. Other than a delay of some time, there were no other losses. Regarding this, Long Yanwei and Easy Hua could only sigh that the other cultivators reaped what they sowed. If they did not covet other people's things, they would not have fallen to such a state. On this day, Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the house after her injuries were completely healed. The moment Bailey Hongzhuang opened the door, many eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. Ever since the battle between Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had taken place, many cultivators who had gone out for training had returned one after another. Naturally, they were the first to know about such explosive news. Immediately, they were filled with curiosity towards Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two new cultivators. They were just cultivators who had just arrived at Penglai Island not long ago. However, they were able to turn the entire outer palace upside down. This was something that had never happened before. Even some of the cultivators in the inner palace had never caused such a big commotion when they were in the outer palace. More than 200 people besieged 4 people. In the end, the result was a crushing defeat. It was really inconceivable. Regarding this, some cultivators could not help but secretly rejoice. They only felt that they were extremely lucky. Fortunately, they had been training outside before. If they were also in the outer palace, they would definitely not sit idly by after knowing about this news. Once they joined in, the result would definitely not be much better than those fellows whose strength had regressed. Chapter 3399. Look, Bailey Hongzhuang is here. She's the one who poisoned them. She really is a peerless beauty. Her beauty is simply stunning. I'm afraid there's going to be a show to watch now. These guys' strength has been declining recently. No matter if it's the doctors or pharmacists, they all said that there's no way to cure them. Now, they're placing all their hopes on Bailey Hongzhuang. In my opinion, these people shouldn't have any hope at all. They seriously injured Bailey Hongzhuang and the others and almost killed them. Bailey Hongzhuang only handed over the antidote because of Master Long and Master Yi. As for helping them recover their strength, that's just a pipe dream. Some of the disciples who had just returned began to discuss. Now that the main character had finally come out, the people whose strength had declined must be filled with anticipation. However, if they were in Bailey Hongzhuang's shoes, they would definitely not help the other party to recover their strength. Helping your enemy. Isn't there something wrong with your brain? Di Beichen and the other two opened the door when they heard the commotion outside. When they saw Bailey Hongzhuang, the 4 of them smiled at each other. Have you all fully recovered from your injuries? Bailey Hongzhuang asked with a smile. Di Beichen nodded. I'm fine now. We're fine too. After resting for so many days, I can't help but want to move my arms and legs. Shangguan Yingying joked. Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled. It seems that the battle half a month ago wasn't enough for you. Shangguan Yingying shook her head. Forget it, I don't want to experience that kind of thing again. She believed that no one would want to experience that kind of exhaustion and despair again. If not for the fact that Hongzhuang was a poison master, they would have really lost their lives here. Until they perished, Master Long and Master Yi probably wouldn't even feel the fluctuation of elemental energy. It was truly terrifying. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 came out, Long Yanwei immediately received the news and rushed over. When he saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were in high spirits and that their complexions had recovered their rosy complexions, Long Yanwei also revealed a joyful smile. It seems that you all have recovered quite well. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 nodded in unison, replying, thanks to Master Long's care, we have already recovered. That's good. Long Yanwei nodded. I almost thought that the 3 contracted beasts that were just sent out were gone. Hearing the joking tone and Long Yanwei's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 could not help but chuckle. This is really dangerous. Wasting 3 demon pet eggs. This is too much of a waste of natural resources. When Xiren sighed, it wasn't easy for him to have his own contracted beast, and they had only been together for a short hour before they had to lose their lives together. That was too tragic. This matter has truly exceeded my expectations. However, the performance of the 4 of you is equally outstanding. It has greatly surprised me. Long Yanwei sighed in his heart. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were actually able to survive under such circumstances. He really didn't know if he should say that they had extraordinary abilities or that they were lucky. This kind of news, even if it was spread, no one would believe it. Chapter 3400. We still have to use our strength to prove that your eyesight is not bad. How can we die so easily? Wouldn't that turn Lord Long into a joke? When Xiren blinked his eyes and said in a teasing manner. Looking at Wen Xiren's appearance, Long Yanwei could not help but laugh. He realized that within Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4, Wen Xiren was the most active. He did not care about joking at all. In that case, I have to thank you all. When Xiren waved his hand, I can't say that I'm thankful. No matter what, we took advantage of you. Seeing that Wen Xiren was actually climbing up the pole like this, Long Yanwei helplessly shook his head. You slippery brat. If I had known earlier that you would be like this, I would have confiscated your demon pet egg. Master Long, you can't be like this. When Xiren's face fell, but he quickly smiled again. But now, I've already completed the contract. You stinking brat. Long Yanwei knew Xiren's shameless personality, so he was too lazy to say anything more. Instead, he turned his gaze to Bailey Hongzhuang, which was his original purpose for coming here. Bailey Hongzhuang, I have something to ask you. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and said, Master Long, what do you want to ask? We've already given the antidote to those cultivators according to the detoxification method you mentioned. Now, their poison has indeed been detoxified. However, their cultivation levels have decreased to different degrees. I want to ask if you have any ideas on how to solve this problem. Why did such a situation happen to them? When Long Yanwei asked, the gazes of many cultivators around them landed on them. Almost all the cultivators whose cultivation had decreased had already run out of the house. Their burning gazes were directed at Bailey Hongzhuang. They only wanted to know Bailey Hongzhuang's answer. The decrease in cultivation was the most unacceptable thing for them. It would take a long time for them to recover their lost cultivation. This meant that their advantage would be greatly reduced, and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. This was especially true for those cultivators who wanted to pass the test to become Inner Hall disciples. If they still had some hope before, now that their cultivation had declined, they had no hope at all. The assessment was already very difficult to pass. Now that their cultivation had dropped, it meant that they could only obediently leave Penglai Palace when the time was up. There was no possibility of them ever coming back. This was too depressing. They knew very well that if they came to ask Bailey Hongzhuang would not help them. After all, they had wanted to take the lives of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Hence, they could only place their hopes on Lord Long. Lord Long had a very close relationship with Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. It was because of Lord Long that Bailey Hongzhuang would hand over the antidote formula. Now, whether or not they could recover their cultivation completely depended on Lord Long hearing Long Yanwei's question. Bailey Hongzhuang was not surprised. She had already guessed that Long Yanwei would ask her this and had thought about how to answer. There is no other way. Bailey Hongzhuang gave a definite answer. Chapter 3401. Long Yanwei did not completely believe Bailey Hongzhuang's answer because Bailey Hongzhuang must have a deep hatred for those cultivators. Hence, it was normal for her to be unwilling to reveal the method to improve their condition. In other words, any cultivator would have made the same choice as Bailey Hongzhuang. However, the implications of the current situation were too great. Only by revealing the method to Bailey Hongzhuang would they be able to reduce their losses. I know that these people wanted to take your lives before, so it's normal that you don't want to tell them the solution. However, based on the current situation, if they can improve their situation, their influence will be reduced a little. This incident has caused quite a stir. I'm afraid that the palace master will be shocked when he returns. Long Yanwei slowly spoke. Long Yanwei didn't say the rest of his words. He believed that Bailey Hongzhuang already understood what he meant. Di Beichen and the other two's eyes fell upon Bailey Hongzhuang. They had only just found out about the fact that the outer palace disciples' cultivation levels had decreased. Regardless of what decision Bailey Hongzhuang made, they would definitely support her. Lord Long, it's not that I'm unwilling to reveal the method. Since I've already revealed the method to detoxify the poison, what's there that I can't reveal about the decrease in my cultivation level? However, I really don't have any other way. Bailey Hongzhuang spread her hands. Her expression was calm, and her pitch-black phoenix-like eyes did not have the slightest ripple in them. If it weren't for the fact that we had been forced to the point where we had no other choice, I would never have used such a method because I know that the poison's influence is very great. Unfortunately, no one had any intention of letting us go at that time, so I had no choice but to use this method. This poison can stimulate a cultivator's battle power to an unprecedented level. However, I'm sure that you're aware of the effects of overdraft. Most of the time, there will be a certain side effect. The decrease in one's cultivation level is one of the side effects. At that time, the more violent the attack, the faster the flow of the yuan power in the cultivator's body, the greater the decrease in their cultivation level. Similarly, if the cultivator had not attacked at that time, and the yuan power in the cultivator's body remained in a stable state, their cultivation level would not have decreased. At the end of the day, you've only reaped what you sowed. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but look at the crowd outside who had pricked up their ears to listen to the news as a disdainful light flashed in her eyes. She reaped what she sowed. This saying was not wrong at all. When the crowd heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words, their expressions instantly turned ugly. This means that they would never be able to recover their lost cultivation levels. However, Bailey Hongzhuang gave such a reason, so they could only swallow this bitter water into their own stomachs. Who told them to be so impatient to take the lives of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others? What else could they say now that they had ended up like this? Long Yanwei was shocked when he heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang's poison would be so effective. It really shocked him. However, when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's calm and unwavering eyes, Long Yanwei knew that everything that Bailey Hongzhuang had said was the truth. At this point, there was no turning back for this matter. Chapter 34:02. Lord Long, I'll have to trouble you. Bailey Hongzhuang cupped her hands in greeting. Her pretty face revealed a hint of cruelty. I didn't want to cause you any trouble. Long Yanwei waved his hand. I can't blame you for this. If you want to get to the bottom of it, I was the one who started this. As he spoke, Long Yanwei glanced at Di Beichun and the other two, then continued. You guys should focus on your cultivation. You don't have to worry about this matter. I'll take care of it. Thank you, Lord Long. The four of them bowed to Long Yanwei. Only then did Long Yanwei turn around and leave. At the same time, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's gazes turned towards the gazes that were focused on them downstairs. Compared to the provocative and dismissive gazes from before, everyone's gazes were now filled with fear, especially those cultivators who had managed to escape with their lives. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' gazes, they all felt a little guilty. As soon as their gazes met, they all retracted their gazes. Their original arrogance and disdain had completely disappeared. They had so many people against 4 people, yet they still ended up in such a state. If word got out, it would really be a joke. Seeing the crowd's gazes, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others felt a wave of satisfaction. Although the previous battle was extremely tragic, they were still very satisfied with the outcome before their eyes. At the very least, these fellows no longer dared to be as arrogant as before. Those foul words had also stopped. Hongzhuang, I never thought that your poison would have such an effect. Originally, I was a little unwilling to let them go just like that. Now that I know this, my heart feels much better. Shangguan Yingying's eyes rippled with excitement. Those fellows all wanted their lives. If they were to be safe and sound, she would not be happy. Although the consequences of a drop in cultivation were not as bad as death, it would still make them feel uncomfortable for a while. When Xiren also gave Bailey Hongzhuang a thumbs up, when it comes to poison techniques, I only admire you. Every time Hongzhuang took out a poison, it had an amazing effect. She was always able to save them from their predicament. He was really convinced. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Fortunately, I like to study these things on a daily basis. Otherwise, with the previous situation, we would really be finished. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, The crowd's eyes involuntarily sunk. Those fellows had actually thought of concealing yuan power undulations. What a good plan. Just a little more, and the other party would have succeeded. Hong Zhuang, I'm very supportive of your research on poison. I feel that it's much easier than cultivation. Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with a joyful smile. I feel like I'm starting to get interested in this poison technique. In the past, I didn't think much of it. I thought that once a cultivator's strength reached a certain level, this poison technique wouldn't be able to harm them. However, ever since I met you, I've changed my view of poison techniques. If I can use poison, I feel that it'll be a great killing weapon. Looking at Shangguan Yingying's excited look, Xiren couldn't help but pat her head and said, Yingying, with your character, I think it's better to forget about it. Otherwise, if you throw out a handful of poison without saying a word, I think everyone in front of us will be poisoned to death by you. Chapter 34:03. In such a situation, using poison was much easier than fighting. With Shangguan Yingying's temper, there was no end to the people she would offend. Isn't this good? This way, we can save a lot of trouble. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. She completely disagreed with Xiren's words. When Xiren sighed, it has indeed reduced a lot of trouble in a short period of time. But if those guys are like Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxiu and have an elder brother or other relatives behind them, then wouldn't it be endless trouble? Shangguan Yingying was stunned. Thinking of the trouble Gao Hanshan brought to them, she sighed in her heart. If they had simply killed Gao Hanxiu and Shangguan Yingying, their journey to Penglai Island should have been very smooth. However, they had to hide like stray dogs. This feeling was really uncomfortable. Xiren, that's not right either. Di Beichun smiled faintly. If Gao Hanshun hadn't brought us all kinds of trouble, how could we have joined Penglai Palace? It would have been even more impossible to have our own contract beast. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. So, whether this is a blessing or a curse, it's hard to tell in a short time. We can be considered to have hit the jackpot, but we have found a good way out. At present, they did not have any sense of belonging to Penglai Palace, but they were really grateful to Master Long. Yes, maybe I can find more good luck. Shangguan Yingying chuckled. Yingying, if you're interested in poison, I can teach you. However, it is more troublesome to learn. You have to have a certain amount of patience. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curved into a faint smile. No matter what you learned, it was not easy to learn. However, as long as you persevered, you would eventually get a good harvest. They all focused their energy on cultivation, but if they could learn some side jobs, sometimes they could achieve unexpected results. Speaking of which, although the side jobs she learned seemed to be of little use, once they were used, they could be of great help to them. If Di Beichin and the other two were interested in developing side jobs, this was a good choice. Hong Zhuang, do you support me too? Shangguan Yingying asked excitedly. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Of course. It's good to have one more ability. That's great. I want to start learning from you. Shangguan Yingying's eyes sparkled as she looked at Xiren provocatively. Did you see that? Hongzhuang and Beichun both support me. Looking at Shangguan Yingying's proud look, when Xiren couldn't help but laugh. Forget it, as long as you're happy. After Long Yanwei returned, he announced the answer given by Bailey Hongzhuang. Instantly, the group of cultivators whose powers had been reduced looked as if they had been sentenced to death. Their faces were extremely ugly. It's over. My cultivation base has fallen by 2 levels. It's simply impossible for me to pass the inner hall's test with this level of cultivation. My cultivation has regressed by 1 level. It wasn't easy for me to raise it up. Now that it's regressed, I'm afraid I'll return to being bullied by others. Chapter 34:04. Cultivators who dropped a level were fine, but they would need to spend more than half a year to replenish their yuan li. The Outer Palace disciples of Penglai Palace could cultivate here for 5 years. As long as they didn't make a big mistake in these 5 years, they wouldn't be kicked out of Penglai Palace. If they lost a level of cultivation, they still had a chance to make up for it. But if they lost 3 levels of cultivation, it was completely impossible. In 5 years, they didn't even know if they could make up for the 3 levels of cultivation. If they wanted to pass the Inner Palace's assessment, it was completely impossible. Not only that, if his cultivation base fell below the 5th level of the Purple Realm, then Penglai Island would be filled with danger. Any random cultivator would be stronger than him. Other than being a coward and living in fear, there was no other way. Thinking back, they were still a very high-profile existence in this outer palace. Suddenly becoming so weak, no one could accept it. The most important thing was that they had offended a lot of cultivators. Now that their cultivation was weak, whether they could keep their lives was a problem. For a moment, everyone couldn't help but regret. They should have known that the person who was favored by Master Long and even gave out 3 demon pet eggs was definitely not an ordinary person. However, they didn't believe in evil. They forced themselves to such a state. It was truly a self-inflicted evil. After this incident, everyone no longer suspected that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had some shady business with Master Long. Because Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were real geniuses. Every disciple of Penglai Palace was a cultivation genius. But when all these geniuses gathered together, there was naturally a difference between geniuses and geniuses. There were many famous geniuses in Penglai Palace, but the newcomers who made such a terrifying scene, other than Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3, there was no one else. While everyone was talking, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had already gone to the ocean world to gain experience. Other people's views had nothing to do with them. They came here just to cultivate in peace and improve their own cultivation. Their bodies had just recovered. It would take some time for them to completely recover their combat power. So going to the ocean world to gain experience was undoubtedly the best. This was because when they went to the Penglai Palace, not only did they have to face monsters, they also had to face troublesome cultivators. One had to know that the trouble brought by cultivators was much more than the trouble brought by demonic beasts. In the process of cultivation, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were also waiting for the news of the punishment. After this incident, they found out that the leader of Penglai Palace and some teachers were not in Penglai Palace. They could only make a decision after the leader returned. Therefore, they wanted to wait until the palace master returned to know the final decision. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had waited for a while, but the palace master had not returned. They felt rather helpless. We don't know when the palace master will return. Why don't we go to the training grounds first? Xiron frowned. Waiting like this was not a solution. Only after they had obtained a certain amount of merit points from the training grounds would it be most worthwhile for them to cultivate in the cultivation area. After all, cultivating in the cultivation area would yield twice the results with half the effort. Chapter 34:05. Deep Bachin nodded, his deep eyes filled with thoughts. Indeed, it's a waste of time to continue waiting here. Presumably, when we come back from our training, the palace master will come back. No matter what the result is, it's not something we can change. It's good to take this opportunity to see the training grounds of Penglai Palace. Listening to Di Baichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang also had no objections. I have no problem. I'll listen to you. Shangguan Yingying also shrugged. Since everyone's opinion is the same, let's go. After making the decision, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 did not delay any longer. They immediately packed up and were ready to set off. Before setting off, the 4 also went out to buy some things they needed. After all, anything could happen when they went out to train. It was best to be prepared. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 walked in the outer hall again. Everyone was still paying attention to them, but no one dared to provoke them. After all, if Bailey Hongzhuang poisoned someone again, then they would really be finished. No one could afford to pay such a price. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were also happy to be quiet. This kind of quiet state of cultivation was exactly what they wanted. Everyone was quite curious after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 finally walk out of the house. In fact, after Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 came to Penglai Palace, they basically closed the door and did not go out. It was extremely quiet. Now that they finally came out, everyone was also a little curious about what Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were going to do. It had been a month since the amazing battle. So far, no one had seen Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 get any punishment. Subconsciously, they only felt that they were really not simple. They caused such a big mess, and they still had Master Long behind them. Even if the palace master came back, they would not be severely punished. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three walked towards the teleportation array according to what was written in the manual. It was obvious that most of the Outer Palace disciples were not willing to pay them any attention. They did not want to be treated badly, so they decided to set off on their own. Penglai Palace is very big. Bailey Hongzhuang looks at the map drawn in the manual and finally arrives at the transmission circle. In their line of sight, two huge teleportation arrays appeared in front of them. The scale of these teleportation arrays was much more spectacular than the ones Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had seen before. However, there weren't many people in the vicinity of the teleportation array. Most of them had either entered the teleportation array or returned through the teleportation array to collect merit points. There were very few cultivators here. This teleportation array is so big, I'm afraid it can teleport a very long distance, Di Beichun said slowly in a low voice. The distance of the teleportation was related to the scale of the teleportation array. The bigger the teleportation array, the more arrays were inscribed inside, and the more stable it was. At the same time, it also proved that the distance was very far, so it needed to be so stable. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded her head lightly. The distance between the islands of Penglai Island is not close. This place is completely the training ground of Penglai Palace, so it must be farther. Chapter 3406. However, there are two teleportation arrays here. Which one should we enter? Shangguan Yingying looked at the two teleportation arrays in front of her in confusion. It was said that one of the two teleportation arrays teleported to the place where the inner hall disciples went, and the other teleported to the place where the outer hall disciples went. However, from the looks of it, there was no difference at all. Hearing this, Di Beichun also frowned. Indeed, there are no markings here. The four people walked around the two teleportation arrays and found that there were no markings at all. They cannot see any difference. What should we do? Shangguan Yingying's face was a little embarrassed. It seems that we have no other way but to ask someone. Bailey Hongzhuang was also a little helpless. They didn't want to trouble anyone because they were too eye-catching now. Their every move would be noticed by others. Unfortunately, in the current situation, they had no other choice but to do this. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others suddenly saw a familiar figure. This person was none other than Li Shankai, who had brought them to register. Seeing this figure, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but have their eyes lit up. They didn't know anyone in Penglai Palace. The only person they had dealt with was Li Shankai. At this moment, Li Shankai was walking over with a group of cultivators. Obviously, they were also preparing to go to the training place in a team. Most of the disciples of Penglai Palace were recruited alone, and there was a certain danger in going to the training place. Therefore, everyone would find some like-minded disciples to form a team. This way, their safety would undoubtedly be a little more guaranteed. Most of such teams had 5 or 6 people on the small side, and a dozen or even dozens of people on the large side. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others should be considered the smallest team. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others noticed Li Shankai also saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. He couldn't help but panic. He knew very well that he was the only one who had dealt with Bailey Hongzhuang and others in the entire outer hall of Penglai. Originally, he was a little dissatisfied with the stinginess of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. When everyone asked him about Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, he was also a little resentful and didn't speak very politely. Afterwards, after knowing that everyone was preparing to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, he didn't go and remind them. In fact, he himself also wanted to get some benefits. If he could get the demon pet egg, that would be a really lucky thing. However, he couldn't help but feel a little worried that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were valued so highly by Master Long. Moreover, at that time, it was Master Long who asked him to bring Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three to report. If he were to participate, he was afraid that the punishment he would receive would be more severe than anyone else, so he had not made a move. He only wanted to wait for everyone to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three before joining in the fight for the demon pet eggs. However, this final result was obviously beyond everyone's expectations. At the same time, it also made him feel lucky. Fortunately, he didn't make a move at that time. Otherwise, he would have dropped a level like those guys. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were very happy after seeing Li Shengkai. Li Shengkai wasn't among the people who attacked them last time, so their impression of Li Shengkai was still very good. Chapter 3407. Senior Brother Li. Shangwan Yingying had a bright smile on her face. Are you guys forming a team to go to the training ground? Seeing that Shangwan Yingying didn't seem to hold any grudges, Li Shengkai felt a little awkward. However, a smile soon appeared on his face. Yes. Are you guys going to the training ground too? Shangwan Yingying smiled and nodded. We haven't been to the training ground yet, so we want to take this opportunity to see it. Since we've already met, why don't we go together? Hearing this, Li Shengkai was startled. He then looked at the cultivators beside him. There were too many cultivators during the battle. He was afraid that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three wouldn't be able to remember clearly. However, there were still people in his team who had dropped levels because of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Not only did these people's strength drop, but they were also punished by Master Long. It could be said that they didn't have a good time during this period of time. Therefore, they decided to go to the training ground today to obtain merit points. Their cultivation had dropped too much. They could only hope to work hard to recover their cultivation in the cultivation area. The longer this delay, the worse it would be for them. However, none of them expected to meet Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three here. He could already feel the anger and killing intent faintly gathering from some of the cultivators in the team. Bailey Hongzhuang, Deep Beichun, and Wenziren also had faint smiles on their faces. However, after noticing Li Shengkai's somewhat awkward expression, they also keenly noticed that several people in Li Shengkai's team were clearly looking at them with some hostility. Although they weren't sure if their judgment was right, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two were already a little vigilant in their hearts. In the outer hall, they had made many enemies. Junior Sister Shangwan, we already have a lot of people here. In my opinion, we should teleport separately, Li Shengkai slowly said. At this point, he did not want to fall out with Shangwan Yingying and the others. However, his team had already trained together many times, and he was in an awkward position between the two. Shangwan Yingying did not mind Li Shengkai's words. She immediately nodded and said, Senior Brother Li, it's our first time heading to the training grounds. However, may I know which teleportation formation we Outer Palace disciples will be heading to? After Shangwan Yingying said that, another cultivator pointed at one of the teleportation formations and said, the teleportation formation on the left. Li Shengkai, am I right? Li Shengkai was startled. Looking at the teleportation array the man was pointing at, a complicated look flashed in his eyes. However, after noticing the man's threatening gaze, he still nodded. I see. Shangwan Yingying smiled faintly. Thank you. Li Shengkai, I just remembered that I left something at my place and forgot to bring it. Why don't we set off later? The cultivator said. Oh, only then did Shangwan Yingying return to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. She pointed at the teleportation formation on the left and said, Li Shengkai said the teleportation formation on the left. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two couldn't help but look at each other with a complicated expression. Could there be a problem? I keep feeling that Li Shengkai's expression is a little strange, and the cultivators and his team seem to be hostile to us. Di Beichan said in a deep voice. Chapter 3408. I don't think so, right? Ziren frowned. Li Shengkai's expression was very strange when he left last time. Until now, I still can't figure out the reason for his expression. Maybe he's just like that? In our current situation, ordinary cultivators shouldn't take the initiative to cause trouble for us, right? Shangwan Yingying looked puzzled. As soon as we enter, Li Shengkai's lie will be exposed. Would he do such a stupid thing? For a moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had complicated expressions on their faces. They could not make up their minds. Li Shengkai won't gain anything by offending us. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Then, should we believe him this time? Di Beichen's face darkened slightly. All kinds of possibilities kept flashing through his mind. If the other party was not Li Shengkai, but another disciple, he would definitely choose to enter another teleportation formation with such a strange behavior. However, Li Shunkai was the cultivator assigned by Long Yanwei to bring them in. He really could not think of a reason why Li Shunkai would lie to them. Forget it. Let's go take a look. If something is wrong, we'll just come back, Bailey Hongzhuang said in a deep voice. Li Shunkai was also very conflicted at this moment. He could not help but frown and look at the cultivator beside him. Why did you lie to them like this? Once they know the truth, we'll be in trouble. You've already suffered a loss at their hands. Don't tell me you want to suffer a loss again. Li Shunkai's expression was ugly. If possible, he really did not want to provoke Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. The growth of these four people had shown an uncontrollable trend. As long as they continued to develop, their future development would definitely be limitless. Offending these cultivators with limitless prospects would not benefit them at all. Once they were targeted, it would put them in a difficult situation. I admit that their talent and combat strength are very strong, but I won't be happy if I don't vent my anger. I'm sure you've heard about the training grounds of the Inner Hall. As long as they go, they will never come back alive. This Bailey Hongzhuang's poison technique is indeed powerful, but their poison is completely useless. The man's lips curled into a cold smile, and the light in his eyes was extremely vicious. His cultivation had already reached the 7th level of the Purple Realm, and he wasn't far from breaking through to the 8th level of the Purple Realm. He had already made up his mind. As soon as he broke through to the 8th level of the Purple Realm, he would participate in the advancement test. Once he became an Inner Palace disciple, his future would be limitless. However, his cultivation had actually dropped from the 7th level of the Purple Realm to the 6th level of the Purple Realm, and this was because he had not made a move before. Otherwise, he might have already dropped to the 5th level of the Purple Realm. Originally, he thought that he had a high chance of passing the advancement test, but now his hopes were almost completely gone. How could he be happy, now that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had come to ask them such a question? In his opinion, this was a chance given to him by God for revenge. If he didn't seize it, it would be a waste. Only when they were dead could he breathe a sigh of relief. Chapter 3409. Looking at Li Shunkai's frightened look, the man's eyes flashed with displeasure. If you are so afraid of them, then you can tell them the truth now, but I don't know if they will believe me or not. The man looked at Li Shunkai with increasingly cold eyes. If they don't kill me, then I promise you will die miserably in my hands. Hearing the murderous intent in the man's words, Li Shunkai couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. This man had always been the leader of their team. Even if the man's cultivation had declined compared to before, his combat power was still stronger than his. Most importantly, he knew that the man was absolutely telling the truth. Once he told the truth to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, this man would definitely attack him. Unless he told Bailey Hongzhuang and the others and then asked them for help, he would be safe only if this man died. However, would Bailey Hongzhuang and the others help him? Thinking of this, Li Shunkai did not have enough confidence in his heart. After all, he had only dealt with Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others might not believe what he said. It was better to avoid trouble. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were already in trouble because of the previous incident. Presumably, they would not do anything for him. After thinking about it, Li Shunkai finally gave up the plan in his heart. Compared to this possibility, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were more likely not to return. If Bailey Hongzhuang and the others died, then all of this would naturally have nothing to do with him. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others finally decided to believe Li Shunkai. After seeing that Li Shunkai and the others had no intention of leaving, they did not continue to delay and directly opened the teleportation formation. After watching Bailey Hongzhuang and the others open the teleportation formation, several cultivators in Li Shunkai's team showed gloating smiles on their faces. The Outer Palace disciples had entered the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples. This kind of thing had happened before in the history of Penglai Palace. It was just that in the end, they never returned. The reason why the Penglai Palace's advancement test was so difficult was related to the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples. If one did not possess such strength, entering the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples would only result in death. It was said that the training grounds of the inner palace disciples were much more dangerous than the training grounds of the outer palace disciples. The reason why it was difficult for the number of inner palace disciples to increase was because the training grounds were too dangerous. The slightest carelessness would cause one to lose one's life. Even the inner palace disciples had a high mortality rate when they went there, not to mention Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two newcomers who had just joined the Penlai Palace. Compared to the gloating crowd, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were completely unaware of the dangers of the place they were heading to. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others walked out of the teleportation array, they saw that they were surrounded by a forest. A rotten smell spread in the air, causing them to frown. Aren't we supposed to appear in a sea? Why does the environment here look so special? Shangguan Yingying frowned and looked around. She felt that the environment was completely different from what she had imagined. Chapter 34:10. At a glance, the surrounding environment gave Bailey Hongzhuang and the others an extremely unfamiliar feeling. They had been to many places over the years, but this was the first time they had seen such an environment. There was an indescribable dark aura and a sense of discomfort, as if there was an inexplicable coldness drilling into their bodies. The four of them slowly walked down from the teleportation array and stood on the spot, looking at their surroundings. For some reason, they gradually had a bad feeling in their hearts. "I don't think we're on an island," Xiren said slowly. Deep Bachin nodded, and a heavy expression appeared on his extraordinarily handsome face. "This is indeed not an island. There's no smell of the sea breeze here at all. The air is not humid. On the contrary, it smells rotten and dead. I'm afraid we've come to the wrong place." As Di Beichen's voice fell, the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but change. This was not good news. So Li Shunkai lied to us? Shangguan Yingying raised her voice filled with disbelief. "That should be the case," Di Beichen replied. Shangguan Yingying frowned. "But why would he lie to us? What good would it do him?" "I'm afraid it's the doing of the other disciples in his team. After all, Li Shunkai didn't answer your question first." Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was slightly heavy. Although she had some doubts before, she felt that Li Shunkai had no reason to lie to them. This was because this was a lie that could be easily exposed. As long as they came, they would know that they had fallen into a trap. When they returned, it would definitely be troublesome. Hearing this, Shangguan Yingying recalled the previous scene, and her face could not help but turn ugly. "That's true. So, the guys in Li Shinkai's team want to harm us. I didn't expect this guy to be so despicable. When I return, I must teach them a lesson." Shangguan Yingying's face was full of anger. She had regarded Li Shunkai as a friend, but she did not expect him to treat them like this. "In my opinion, this matter is not as simple as it seems," Di Beichan said slowly, his deep eyes flashing with a thoughtful light. They know that this is a lie that can be easily exposed, but they still decided to do it. "Why do you think?" As soon as he said this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Xiren couldn't help but look at each other. They all understood what Di Beichen meant. "You mean, they have the confidence to keep us here forever?" Xiren asked. Di Beichen nodded. "If that's not the case, their actions are a bit too stupid." "No way." Shangguan Yingying found it hard to believe. "Then why don't we just go back through the teleportation array? Let's give it a try." Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes darkened slightly. She immediately walked into the teleportation array again. She also felt that this matter was a little strange. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, Di Beichen and the other two also walked into the teleportation array. As long as they could be teleported back, it meant that there was no problem. However, when Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three tried to go back, they found that the teleportation array showed no signs of being activated at all. Chapter 34:11. What's going on? Why isn't there any movement from the teleportation array? Shangguan Yingying, who was extremely angry before, couldn't help but panic after seeing this scene. When they came, the teleportation array was still fine. Why wasn't it working when they went back? Could it be that there's something wrong with the teleportation array? We can only come here, but not go back. If that's the case, doesn't that mean we have to stay here forever? But we don't even know where this place is. How are we going to go back? For a moment, Thousands of thoughts ran through Shangguan Yingying's mind. Countless thoughts appeared in her mind. If they could only stay here, it would be terrible. Listening to Shangguan Yingying's series of questions, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others felt a headache coming on. This problem was really beyond their expectations. Yingying, don't worry. Let's think about the problem first. Xiren held Shangguan Yingying's hand and calmed her nervous emotions. Shangguan Yingying glanced at Xiren. Her originally nervous emotions calmed down a little. She was really too anxious just now. If there was really something wrong with the teleportation array, it would be a bolt from the blue for them. No one knew where they were teleported to. If they wanted to go back, they wouldn't be able to tell the direction at all. It was tantamount to a dead end. Di Beichen and Xiren carefully inspected the teleportation array. Both of their faces were somewhat heavy. After a moment, Di Beichen and Xiren raised their heads. Their eyes flashed with doubts. There's something wrong with this teleportation array. Di Beichen slowly said. What's the problem? Bailey Hongzhuang asked. She didn't know much about teleportation arrays, so she couldn't determine what the problem was. This teleportation array is a little different from the one we used to come here. The one we used to come here could be used at any time, but this one doesn't seem to be able to be used at any time. It seems there's a certain time limit. At this point, Di Beichen couldn't help but turn to Xiren. Xiren, what do you think? When Xiren nodded, although I haven't personally built a teleportation array before, when I hired people to build teleportation arrays in the past, I noticed that there are certain differences between teleportation arrays and other teleportation arrays. This teleportation array does seem to have a time limit, but I don't know how long it is. Di Beichen and Xiren looked at each other. Since the two of them had the same idea, it seemed that this matter was not far from the truth. Shangguan Yingying's eyes brightened. You mean the teleportation array isn't broken, but we can't go back for now? Not bad, Xiren replied. So you don't have to worry too much. We may have to stay here for a while, but it's not like we can't go back. That's good. Shangguan Yingying relaxed a little. As long as I don't have to be a savage here, it's fine. I don't want to wander here forever. After confirming all this, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't leave the range of the teleportation array. Instead, she sat down directly on the side. They had to sort out their thoughts and figure out what the whole thing meant. Chapter 34:12. Even so, their mortality rate in the training ground is not low. It can be seen that this place is not an ordinary place of danger. Bailey Hongzhuang's light and pleasant voice was somewhat heavy. This news was inadvertently heard by Xiao He and Xiao Bai from the other disciples. She did not expect them to come to the training ground of the Inner Palace disciples so early. She had never paid attention to it before. I don't think this place is a good place. There is something strange everywhere. Shangguan Yingying nodded. Those damn guys definitely want us to die here. A strong sense of helplessness appeared on Wen Xiren's face. I feel that since we came to this Penglai Palace, trouble comes one after another. It wasn't easy to solve the trouble last time, but I didn't expect to be tricked again. Next time, we must pay attention. Even if we were just asking for directions, we have to ask a few more. I don't believe that everyone is lying to us. Hearing Xiren's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others shook their heads with a smile. Speaking of which, their popularity in Penglai Palace was really bad. They did not have any friends in the first place. It was not easy to meet Li Shengkai, but they did not expect this guy to lie to them. Since these guys are so confident that it is impossible for us to go back if we stay here, it must be very dangerous here. Di Beichen put away his joking expression, and a serious look appeared on his sharp face. We have to be careful here. If we are not careful, we may lose our lives. For now, we have to find the other Inner Palace disciples and get some relevant information from them. Only then can we understand more about this training ground. Bailey Hongzhuang said in a deep voice. Before they understood the situation here, they had to be careful. Xiren nodded. I understand. Although our reputation in the Outer Palace is not good, we have not offended the Inner Palace disciples. I believe there will be no problem. It's just there is not a single shadow nearby. Shangguan Yingying frowned. So far, other than the movements of the four of them, there was no other movement. She had no idea where the disciples of the Inner Palace were. Di Beichen slowly stood up and looked ahead. His expression was calm. Since this teleportation array will only be activated after a certain period of time, it's naturally useless for Inner Palace disciples to come here now. Therefore, it's normal that there's no one here. Let's go outside and take a look. I believe that we will soon encounter other Inner Palace disciples. Following Di Baichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two also stood up. Right now, they could only take one step at a time. Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and White Lion had already come out of the Chaos Ring. Di Baichen and the other two's contract beasts were still very young, so they temporarily stayed in the Chaos Ring. This place was filled with danger, and it was not a good place for them. White Lion walked next to Bailey Hongzhuang. However, as soon as it came out, White Lion's eyes darkened. Master, this place is filled with a dark aura. There is no sign of life. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded gently. Indeed, this place is a little strange. It's my first time seeing such a lifeless place.